Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to go ahead and get our session started. Just as a point of introduction, my name is Arvin Trujillo. I'm the CEO for Four Corners Economic Development, looking at how we can begin to diversify our economy here in the county and really in the Four Corners region. We've been working on a number of different initiatives with Four Corners Economic Development. One of those initiatives is looking at what the federal government is moving forward in terms of an alternative to carbon energy development through carbon sources. They are now looking at hydrogen as a possible means of generating power, looking into the future. So one of the things that we're looking at is how do we begin to determine what we should do in terms of becoming a hydrogen hub. The federal government is looking to invest $8 billion into at least 4 hubs regionally here within the United States. And so many of the characteristics that we're going to be showing in the discussion here meets what we do have here at San Juan, within San Juan County. And so we're in a position to look at this, but there's been a lot of questions out there. What is this? What's hydrogen? What's the hydrogen hub? What do we mean by all of this? And so we're going to be going through hydrogen. I guess you could just call it Hydrogen 101. We're going to start from the beginning and begin to give you a sense as to what we're talking about, what people are looking at, and we're going to be having 2 sessions here. We've got a program in front of you giving you the questions that are going to be asked, and they're very basic questions, looking at hydrogen, where's the markets, what is a hub, looking at those very basic questions. And then following this session, we're having another session on March 8th, and that will be looking at the legislation, looking at what is happening from the federal government side, the state side, environmentally, what are we looking at, and et cetera. So again, we're looking at 2 sessions for this. But before I start, I want to first thank New Mexico Gas Company and ConocoPhillips for sponsoring these sessions for us. If you could give them a hand, I'm sure there's a representative here. But I just want to thank them for their sponsorships. Also, I would suggest if any of you have not, if you could visit our website at www.4cornersed.com. The first thing that's going to pop up is a portal for our newsletter. We issue a newsletter out every 2 weeks, and you get a good picture as to what we're working on, areas that we're focused on, information involving economic development here, not only in the county, but looking at how the things that are happening within the state and regionally could be affecting us. Another thing is 2 things I don't want you walking out without doing. One, your name tags. If you could stick them in the basket as you leave, we would really appreciate that, because I think a lot of you are going to come back for the second session. And second of all, evaluations. We'll be issuing evaluations on this briefing here, and we would really, truly like to get your feedback on how this went, because again, as we look at this, we begin to determine how do we make these briefings more informative, how do we make them better, and how do we improve our efforts here. And last of all, one thing is that the fact that as we look at economic development, many of us, this is a new thing to us. Before we had the Conocos, the British Petroleums, APS, P&M, BHP, Halliburton, Williams. We had all these companies here, and through their efforts and through their generosity and through their corporate sponsorships and their efforts to help us here, we've been able to utilize those companies in order to build our economy and build our communities here in San Juan County. They're gone. We're now looking at how do we look at economic development? How do we sell ourselves? How do we promote ourselves? What industries do we bring in? And given that, that takes money for us to do. And so again, we've got pledge cards on the table too. In any way you can assist us, we are very appreciative. So with that, I'd like to turn now to our panelists. We have Eric Miller here, who's a professor of chemistry at San Juan College. He's going to give us the very basics on hydrogen. I have Dory Peters here, who's the CEO for Big Navajo Energy. He's going to talk about hydrogen and what it means. How do we produce it? What are we talking about when we look at industrial hydrogen? I have Mr. John Byram with PESCO, the Business Development Manager at PESCO. At PESCO, they're working on developing a reactor to generate hydrogen through with natural gas. And again, it's bringing that information on what we're doing right now and how that's being done. And finally, Mr. Chris Hunter with Cornerstone Business. Mr. Hunter is going to be talking about the hydrogen hub. What does that mean? What are the aspects of a hydrogen hub? And so that's what we're going to be going through. What I would ask is there's index cards at your table. As you listen to the presentations, what we'd like to do is go through the presentations first. And then if you have questions, please note those questions down. We'll have a couple microphones afterwards that you can ask your questions, or you can provide that to folks that will be walking around. We'll have a question and answer session afterwards. So, and we've got a program for you where you can put notes down with different speakers. And again, this is an education process. And so we want to learn, or have you learn, just as we're learning about hydrogen ourselves. Mr. Miller, what is hydrogen?
And I'm here to give you a little introductory chemistry on what is hydrogen. Next slide, please. So hydrogen is made up of atoms, and hydrogen is an atom with one positively charged proton in its nucleus and one negatively charged electron that whips around the nucleus in various ways. The charges are exactly opposite of each other, and they attract each other. So opposite charges attract, and like charges repel. The proton, or the nucleus, is 10,000 times heavier than the electron. And the nucleus also is 10,000 times smaller than the diameter of the atom. We're going to talk about carbon and oxygen as well. So carbon's over here. Carbon has 6 protons and 6 neutrons in its nucleus. The neutrons are there to help hold those like-charged protons together, and all the mass is basically in there, and then it has 6 electrons around it. Oxygen has 8 protons and 8 neutrons in its nucleus and 8 electrons around it. So electrons come and go from atoms, and that's almost the whole study of chemistry. They're being pushed and pulled through wires right now, making the lights shine, keeping our phones working. They're even being exchanged in reactions inside of us, keeping us alive. And so they come and go. So we don't find these elements by themselves here on Earth under room conditions. What happens if we have 2 hydrogen atoms bump into each other? Then they rearrange their electrons to be like this. And so an equilibrium is set up between the repulsions of the positive protons and the attractions, though, between the electrons and the protons. So the electrons tend to pair up and they kind of work together, but they do kind of repel each other. But it turns out this situation is more stable or less energy than the isolated atom. And so we find hydrogen like this under normal conditions here on Earth. So whenever we have 2 electrons in between 2 nuclei, we draw a bond like this. So that represents 2 electrons, and that's H2. And so if we want to compress it down or condense the formula down, we draw H2. So carbon and oxygen do similar things. Next slide, please. Let's get a little visual of what these guys are doing here. So over here we have the ball and stick model of H2. This is the space filling model of H2. And the hydrogen HH bond takes 391 kilojoules per mole to break it, all right? We have oxygen down below there, and the oxygen is double bonded. So notice it has a higher energy to break the oxygen double bond. Next slide, please. So we're also going to be talking about methane and natural gas and so on. So here's methane, and it's got 4 CHs hooked to it, and each CH bond is 413 kilojoules per mole to break it. So it's a little harder to break than HH. And then we got butane here. So butane is also found in natural gas. And carbon can form chains with itself, and that's what gives us all the variety of things we can see here, life, I guess. And carbon-carbon bond is 348 kilojoules to break it, all right? So these will react with oxygen, and next slide, please, and form these products here. So here's a model of water, and water has OH bond energy of 463 kilojoules per mole. And then we have down below here carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is double bonded, C double bond O. And notice it's got the strongest bond energy of all the molecules we've looked at so far. And there's 2 of them in there. Carbon dioxide is an interesting molecule. One of its things is those carbon double bond O's are highly polar. And that means they're efficient infrared energy absorbers, which means they absorb heat, which calls it a greenhouse gas. And it's been studied in that role for over 120 years. Next slide, please.
With that basic chemistry then, Mr. Miller, how does hydrogen compare with natural gas in terms of energy output?
Glad you asked that. That is the next question here. Let's
I feel
compare
like
these.
Mr. Rogers here, you know?
Right on cue. Excellent. So when we burn hydrogen or combine it with oxygen, it releases 229 kilojoules per mole of hydrogen. And I've been throwing around mole a little bit here. Here's what a mole of hydrogen would be at room temperature and pressure, which is about a cubic foot. So if you want to think of that as per cubic foot at air pressure, that would work too. But you can think of it as a mole as per molecule as well, and that's why chemists like to use that, all right? So that releases energy, and that energy is available to do work. That reaction is 60% efficient to convert that to work. It's also reversible, pretty reversible reaction, meaning we would have to put that energy in as a minimum to get it to reverse. Next reaction would be the combustion of methane. And so you can see there we're getting water being formed and carbon dioxide. So you're getting 2 molecules of water and 1 molecule of carbon dioxide. And you're getting more energy released when that reaction occurs. And most of that is coming from the formation of those carbon-oxygen double bonds. And then further comparing as chains might get longer as we think about maybe gasoline or so on, the combustion of butane releases even more energy per molecule of butane, right? So those are definitely the king of energy sources. However, those are only 30% efficient, maybe 40% to convert that energy into work. And that reaction isn't very reversible. So it's pretty much a one-through deal. Releases CO2. We also have other incomplete combustion products like particulates, carbon monoxide, ozone, things like that. The other thing there, you can see we've got a number, the energy released per gram. And so notice, for hydrogen, it releases more energy per gram of hydrogen because hydrogen's so light. And so that's what makes it a good, say, rocket fuel or potentially good transportation fuel as well. All right, I think that's about it there for the basic chemistry.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to turn over to Dory Peters now. Who buys or uses hydrogen, Dory?
Oh, great question. My group of folks, we went out and we looked at where does the marketplace. Of course, you can make hydrogen. At the end of the day, you need to actually sell it to a consumer, whether it be a data center like Microsoft. We are currently under discussions with them and GM as well, and AT&T. As this transition from fossil fuel storage or fossil fuel usage is being slowly moving into a transitional, I think we're at an apex of where we can find there has to be a solution. Everybody's talking about climate change. And so my journey started about 4 years ago, and I gave this presentation, or kind of put this diagram together for folks that I was telling what my vision was for this development. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff that I put together, and folks that were saying, "You're crazy, what are you talking about?" So I said, okay, I'll just put it in a diagram, and it's like a Lego set. So one thing is that when we were looking at consumers, they want to say where it's coming from. They want to know what source, where is it from, is a big deal because there's colors that are associated. I'll bring that up later. However, when I grew up in the Sonosti area as a kid, and I have a lot of family that live in the Aneth area, and as I went out, I could hear the methane, the flaring, and so forth. And so when I started the company, or started transitioning into hydrogen from Big Navajo's primary focus was solar and wind for the last 10 years. And so as I was looking into hydrogen as a possibility for a fuel source and also replacement of batteries, because when I was doing these solar systems or generations of generators, we always had issues with battery life because there's only so much life cycle the battery holds. And we were looking at other alternatives to battery. And so what I engaged Navajo Oil and Gas, and I said, what if we were to capture the wasted flared gas, what Eric was talking about, the CH4? What if we capture that so it's no longer flaring, and we capture that in a system where we can actually utilize instead of having it as a cost? Because for an oil company, it costs money to flare. You're just burning it off. There's no use for it, so they figure either you're going to strand it, cap it, because there's no pipeline to transfer that natural gas to a location, so it's easier just to burn it off. As you know, you see that throughout over the country and across the world, that people just flare that natural gas because they don't want it. And I said, what if I take it? They said, what if you give it to me and I'll do something with that and pay you guys a royalty in return and actually do something with that natural gas. Instead of just burning it, we can clean up the air and mitigate some of that CH4 exposure in the atmosphere and really clean up the air as well. And I said, well, why don't we, as you know, they call it an SMR, steam methane reforming right here. Bayotech and all the firms that we engaged said we can take that and actually it's very difficult to separate the hydrogen from natural gas. So you have to go through a certain process of extracting that hydrogen from the CH4 or the actual methane from the gas well. And so that process, you have to heat it up. And that's what this does here. It heats it up and it extracts it off. There's another problem with that. With one thing is that you get the hydrogen out of there, but as a byproduct, you have what the carbon, the CO2. So for every 1 kilogram of hydrogen that you produce, you generally have up to 10x of CO2. So that's kind of bad. And I said, no, it's not bad, because we can take that and capture it in a carbon capture process. A CCS is what they call it, is right here. If we capture that, and I told Navajo Oil and Gas, I said, you would be the first oil and gas company to produce vegetation from a wasted fuel. why don't we take that fuel and actually grow crop from it? So that's what this part here does. And to answer your long-winded question to you, who's going to buy that hydrogen, is that you can, we can press it, store it, and export it. And also, as part of this process here, is that EVs becoming a big deal. I don't know if you guys have been watching TV quite a bit like I do, and as I see that every other commercial is talking about EV charging and everything, like has to do with electric cars. And so as part of the electric car business, you have to charge it at, most stations right now are about anywhere from 20 to 40 kW, which is not a lot of electricity. 40 kW kilowatts to charge a vehicle will take you about almost all day. In some cases, if it's your house, it'll take you all night. So what we decided to do is partner with some other companies, which is no longer Power Innovations, but it's actually Renewable Innovations. We would take the hydrogen and hydrogen fuel and actually utilize that at a station without having to pull from the main grid or else have a huge solar field to power a station. So you can take the hydrogen and actually have it on site to what they call as a fast charging at 175 kW. So at 175 kW, you can charge that EV car for within about 20 minutes or less. So, which is a big savings for a Tesla or whomever, as GM's getting into the business of these EV vehicles, is that no one wants to stay at a station for more than 20, 30, 40, even up to an hour, sitting there waiting for their vehicle to get charged. So what we did is that, which is like other companies are following suit as well, is that we'll take hydrogen and provide that at a station and provide not only the fuel, but also the power of the gas station as well. So that's where that goes to the consumer. The infrastructure of the EV and also the hydrogen is really in an infancy stage right now. So what we're doing is looking at all of the corridors of finding ways to make it possible for one person to charge and feel comfortable. They call it, I think it's EV, something to do with they freak out because they don't know if they're going to make it. My sister works at the hospital in Shiprock. She goes, the poor thing, there was a Tesla with his lights going on. There is not a station in Shiprock to power a Tesla vehicle, so it just conked out right on the hill. So it couldn't make it to Farmington, couldn't make it to Cortez. So one of the things that folks have issues with is making sure, my sister has a Tesla, she's like, trying to, always mapping out where am I going to, and the big problem nowadays is that you have a Tesla station in Utah, where I think it was in Beaver, they had all of them go out, so they had a bottleneck of about 50 cars that couldn't get charged to get back home. So that's what the reality is. So we're thinking that hydrogen is really a great answer, and one of the things that we find with hydrogen in a hydrogen car, the byproduct of it is actually water vapor. So it sucks in all the dirty air, cleans it up through the fuel cell, and out the back end is actually clean water vapor. So it has a zero carbon footprint, which is really a good thing as well. And down here is really a space where we want to do, can I transition to the next one? Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so talking about the different colors. If we were to, there's brown hydrogen is what they call it, and that's really what most of the industry is using today and has been for the last 40 years or so. And that part of it, you don't have this, but you only have this and this as a source, and that becomes either a brown or gray hydrogen, which is really something that they either vent out the CO2. So this part of it's not part of the equation. So they basically just vent it out, and it doesn't, and a lot of folks don't like the fact that you're making hydrogen, but you actually, the byproduct of that is 10x of CO2, so you're venting a lot of that CO2 back in the atmosphere. So the next part of that is that what we're doing is blue, and the green, there's color-coded. Blue hydrogen is basically you're doing a carbon capture, and you're taking that and utilizing that, whether you're going to sell it to, we've been in discussions with Coca-Cola. They said, if you're going to get a huge amount of CO2, we'll take it. We'll take your hydrogen. Or the gas oil company can do that and repurpose that CO2 as well for part of their operations. And so the next big thing that right now I think you hear out there in the space of hydrogen is green hydrogen, which is right here. You're taking solar or wind or other type of renewables, whether it's curtailed wind and solar that you know that some of the companies out there that don't use a lot of the electricity from solar or wind, we take that part, the unwasted part of that energy, take it, and actually can utilize that and split that. But the thing is, the cost of that is really varies. Per megawatt, anywhere from a green application cost of a megawatt of green hydrogen is about $100 to $130 per megawatt, whereas coal is really down at about $20, you know, and then you have hydrogen around $60 to $70 per megawatt cost. You know, it varies, and those costs. And hydrogen is really something that is a new future, and I think that we're moving in the right direction of finding all these resources, and every little step here, whether it's the transportation, the export, the storage, the compression, the SMR unit, the greenhouse, all these parts are job creations. So you basically are looking at a new economy where every part of this is actually a new job that's created in a space where the hydrogen will be a new industry that we can capture. Here in the Four Corners, I think will be a vital, a nice injection into seeing something going forward as a new economy, new tax revenue, and so forth. As a hydrogen hub, this will be enormous, especially in this part here, being able to provide a resource and also a transportation solution for the industry going forward. So those are basically everything. The part I put right in here is that on the reservation, not just limited to Navajo Nation, as we are in discussions with other California tribes and across the country, is access to power. And we're looking at hydrogen fuel cells to power communities, and also being able to provide a solution for what I brought up AT&T, is that AT&T cell towers are run on propane or Generac diesel gas. And the thing is that diesel, we would go out and replace that with a hydrogen storage, which is really kind of cool because you have now a clean resource. And you can, the nice thing about that, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, is you can actually contain hydrogen and capsulize it. And if you were to contain the hydrogen, you can hold it for 500 years and open up 500 years later, it'll be as good as the day you put it in. So it never degrades. And that's really the nice thing about that, is that you can actually contain that. And that's why NASA uses it for long space travel and so forth. You can actually use that. And it's very light. It's extremely light. If you were puncturing that hydrogen, it would just go out and be liberated back in the atmosphere and go right through the ceiling. So, and so basically, that's the thing I think people are looking at, is really the storage. You can either have, there's other storage capacity of salt domes and so forth. You can hold it for a long term. And the hydrogen is really cool, I think, is because that part of it, you can actually utilize it at will. And no other fuel on this planet that can hold for over 100 to 200 years, everything will degrade except for hydrogen.
Thank you, Dory. Very good information. And again, to kind of bring everything together, as you remember from the reaction, looking at the reaction that was done, a byproduct of that is carbon dioxide as you go through the heating process or the separation process. From the large carbon molecules to releasing the hydrogen and bringing in smaller carbon units. Now with that, Dory explained, there are different ways of doing that. And if you do separate that, that hydrogen, but you do not capture the associated carbon dioxide gas, it's called either gray or
Brown.
brown hydrogen, because you're simply releasing the CO2 and you're releasing large amounts of CO2. If you go and you capture that CO2 and use it, either store it, sequester it, use it for oil recovery, etc. You pump it down and you capture that. Then that's known as blue hydrogen. You get the results, but you're pumping, you're sequestering that CO2. And then if you generate it utilizing renewable energy sources, then it takes that aspect of being green hydrogen. So again, looking at the chemistry, looking at the amount of energy produced and how that's produced, you come up with how we generate hydrogen. Now, given that, John, once we produce this hydrogen, how is hydrogen transported? And what are the pros and cons of different approaches?
All right, thank you, Arvin. So as we talked before, hydrogen is a very light molecule, the H2 molecule, and it really doesn't compress into a liquid. So you can't, like propane, your propane tank, it's a gas if you open it up, but if you compress it into the tank, it's actually a liquid. So you can get a lot denser, a lot more energy. But with hydrogen, you can't do that at atmospheric temperatures, just standard temperatures. So you have to cool it a lot. So for the most part, and I think this relates to where hydrogen is made. Hydrogen is made for industrial purposes here in the U.S. in large chemical plants. So there's not really a distributed system for making hydrogen. So the hydrogen will be transported from a plant to the consumer. And so that top picture you see is is what they call a tube trailer. So those are, a lot of times they're steel tanks that are arranged in a bundle on a trailer. And those pressures, they'll pressure up to 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 PSI to cram as much hydrogen into those bottles as possible. And then they're taken to the consumer. The consumer can use that until it bleeds dry, and they'll call for another tank trailer. Another way is the next one. You see that truck in front of the sphere. That's actually liquid hydrogen. So you can liquefy and cool it. And that's what they use on the space shuttle. They liquefy. They'll supercool cryogenically the oxygen and the hydrogen on the space shuttle. So, and this is a similar thing. This is a truck that is showing the use of hydrogen that has been cooled so much that it can be liquefied and under less pressure maintained as a liquid. That way you can transport a lot more hydrogen in the same volume. The thing you do have to you have to keep that hydrogen cool. It will tend to vent off a little bit and auto-refrigerate it, but it's a little bit more complicated process. One thing that Bayotech, the company that we're working with out of Albuquerque, they're actually, that's a small transportation module that may be a little hard to see, but those are smaller tanks. Once again, this is, they're storing compressed gaseous hydrogen in these, but those tanks are made out of a carbon fiber composite, which is becoming more and more common for high pressure gases because the composite material is lighter than metal, lighter than steel, so those are becoming more favorable for cases where you want to carry as much hydrogen crammed in a small place as you can. So once again, you're talking about very high pressures, thousands of pounds, to compress the gas and then to be able to transport it. The pipelines right now are just for short distances, usually moving hydrogen from a hydrogen plant over to a nearby chemical plant where the hydrogen might be used maybe in a refinery or other processes. So there's not really an infrastructure of pipelines in the country that carry hydrogen. So next slide, please. So kind of what's developing, you see the ship over on the right, that's a compressed hydrogen ship, but it's a concept. So they're working on that. Obviously, hydrogen is a means to move energy around, especially with the energy transition, because as Mr. Peters was talking about different ways to generate hydrogen. So it can be an answer to be able to transport energy effectively. So there's a lot of Department of Energy research going into that, from basically moving liquid hydrogen or compressed hydrogen in that system. The other thing is they're looking at pipelines. So while we don't have an infrastructure of hydrogen pipelines in the country, we do have a vast infrastructure of methane or natural gas pipelines. Well, in terms of the question is, well, what if we just dump the hydrogen into natural gas? There's a limit. Hydrogen has an effect on carbon steel where it will make it brittle. So if you run into what they call a hydrogen embrittlement problem with carbon steel if you exceed certain concentrations and expose the steel to too much hydrogen. But once again, part of the Department of Energy research that's going on in universities and labs across the country and with private companies is they're looking to see if they can blend some hydrogen in with the natural gas and actually transport that hydrogen to the end consumer where it would just be burnt as though it was natural gas. Not much change on the consumer side. And the result of that is you're using less natural gas and more hydrogen in an existing infrastructure. So that's another work that's going on that would allow us to transport hydrogen from a large producer to consumers all over the country. And then finally, another area that is being looked at a lot is a way to combine the hydrogen with other atoms to make another molecule that will stay in a liquid form at low pressures. And so a couple of those are ammonia and then this dimethyl ether. So those are molecules that you'll see that have quite a bit of hydrogen on the molecule, and then with a reasonable amount of energy, you can liberate the hydrogen at the point of use and then consume the hydrogen there. So there's a lot that's going on, but right now there really isn't, other than just putting in a truck either compressed gas or liquefied hydrogen. That's pretty much the only way that, for the most part, we're transporting hydrogen at this point.
Thank you, John. Now, looking at, going back to Mr. Peters again, does hydrogen cost more than natural gas per unit of heat output? If so, how much more, subsidized or unsubsidized? Dory?
Thank you. One of the, yes, the answer is yes, hydrogen's more expensive currently, really because of the fact that I associate it as the entry into solar. When panels were introduced and NASA was the only one using that at $1,200 a watt, and that was really unreasonable. Now you're looking at 3 decades later, 4 decades later, we're around 50 cents a watt of cost of solar. So it has gone down over time, and we see this as we transition from the entry and emerging market of usage of heat. Basically, the output, natural gas, of course, is going up. It will continually go up as things happen around the world, and where we're going to find that it fluctuates. But even if the fluctuation is that the hydrogen is still more costly because of how it's produced. And if you can bring up my slide up one more time
Okay.
really quick.
The reason why I say that is that this process right here,
The transportation is really where you get hit hard on the hydrogen being more than natural gas, because natural gas has infrastructure that is already in place and has been in place for decades now. And so you're going to see that in the future, when you have infrastructure for hydrogen, that will go down. Like I was saying, if you were to equate it to megawatt of usage, is that you're still around $60 to $70 per megawatt, which is still relatively high. And then you look at green hydrogen, still over $100 to $130 per megawatt. And those costs are extremely high, but they do need a subsidy component to it. And as the administration moves through this 2050, kind of that benchmark is where they see it as zero emissions, is that they want to be able to subsidize and build infrastructure. And I think that's a great question, because that really narrows that dollar amount to a lower dollar amount with these hydrogen hubs that are going to be proposed throughout the country. And the investment is really to see and move those costs down to where it's more affordable for, everybody to be able to have a vehicle, or else utilize that as a form of electricity and also a way of life for us. So anyway, I think that will probably go down in the next decade or so, slowly.
Okay, thank you, Dory. John, how does Bayotech technology make hydrogen, and why should the market in San Juan County be excited about it?
Right, well, I guess the first thing, maybe a lot of you haven't heard of Bayotech, but they're a company that is based out of Albuquerque. They started with the technology out of Sandia National Labs. We've been working with them for going on 6 years now, and as a manufacturer for their units. But, so the Bayotech process is a miniaturization of steam methane reforming. So this first slide just gives a process flow diagram of the general process. But on the left, you can see that natural gas comes in, and it goes into, they've got to clean up the natural gas first to remove the sulfurs that are in it, that are actually put in there so that you can smell the natural gas. That's what makes natural gas smell if you get a leak in your house. So they have to remove that. Then it goes into basically the reformer process with steam. So you have two inlet streams. One is natural gas, which is that carbon and 4 hydrogen atoms. And then you also have steam, which is water, which is oxygen and 2 hydrogen atoms. That goes into the reformer process at very high heat and through a catalyst, and that liberates the hydrogen atoms off of those 2 molecules. And then the remaining, at the end of the process, the remaining carbon and oxygen atoms then recombine into that lower energy state molecule, the carbon dioxide. So for the most part, and then a big part of this process is also recovering heat and then putting it back into the initial heating so that you increase the efficiency. So what this process does, as we talked about, is you end up with syngas, which is a combination of carbon dioxide and hydrogen, and then that'll go through some filtration processes to filter out the hydrogen. So next slide. So as I mentioned before, right now the world makes hydrogen in fairly large plants. These are hundreds of millions or whatever part of billion-dollar complexes in large central areas where this is made. So this is an Air Liquide processing or a hydrogen plant as an example. So these are very, very large facilities. So next slide. So the breakthrough for Bayotech is they have modularized this. So for scale, you can see this is a concept drawing, and you can see the truck on the right there, but this is a much, much smaller facility. This is something that we've started fabrication on these units. They're actually going to be modularized so that we can put them on a truck here in Farmington and ship them anywhere in the country or even in the world. So there'll be a number of truckloads. They bolt together, and anywhere where you have natural gas, a natural gas pipeline, it can be just any kind of residential grade or commercial grade natural gas, water to generate steam, and then electricity to operate the unit. You could be generating hydrogen. So it changes the game. It puts the hydrogen generation at the point of need rather than generating hydrogen in a large facility and then having to transport it. So like Mr. Peters said, a big part of the cost of hydrogen and transporting it, but if we can make it where it's used, then that eliminates that, largely that transportation part.
So looking at the technology then, what do we see in terms of a hydrogen hub, or what exactly is a hydrogen hub? Chris?
Thank you, Arvin. Let me avoid flattening the curve there, John. So, hey, thank you all. First, before I get right to the answer to the question, I grew up in the energy business. How many of the rest of you guys grew up in the energy business around here? Quite a few of you directly or indirectly. This is an exciting development for San Juan County, a hydrogen hub. The work that Dory is doing or that John and Pesco are talking about are future jobs and future economic stability for our community. But as Dory was pointing out, we're a little bit embryonic in terms of the evolution of this business. Lots of infrastructure requirements, lots of repurposing of things, lots of revising of environmental regulations potentially, and lots of potential subsidizations. We heard that it's expensive, et cetera. So there's change coming. To follow up on one comment that Dory made, Hank Adair, who had to leave for a meeting, was putting out yesterday in a mayor's talk the fact that he's buying electricity for $56 a megawatt hour, and compare that to the 130 megawatt range that Dory was talking about. So that gives you magnitudinally an idea of what that means in terms of an electric business. So one of the things that the government is trying to do is to reduce the cost to consumers by shifting cost burdens to taxpayers through subsidization. And the hydrogen hub is a method of doing that. And I forgot one other thing. I saw a number of you taking pictures. We're going to have this entire slide deck on our website along with a recording of today's presentation and the next meeting, so you'll be able to go back and look at this. But what exactly is a hydrogen hub is the question. And the first thing is it's a brand new term. And I can tell you at Four Corners Economic Development, and many of you as my friends and neighbors and colleagues are all asking the same question. What the heck is it? So think of a hub, a synonym for hub, as a cluster of similarly related economic activity around a purpose. Now, the Department of Energy in DC will not define it that way, but that's functionally what it is. So it's a term, it's a new term, it's being defined by the U.S. Department of Energy. That term will be used to help filter out as criteria how they allocate grant money to spur the infrastructure development that people like Dory and John were describing. So how hydrogen is made, how hydrogen is used, how it could be transported, all of these are economic components associated with a hydrogen hub, as the U.S. DOE defines it. The Small Business Administration has used the idea of clusters for a long time. In Iowa, there are wind energy clusters where communities in Iowa have the community college teaching wind energy technology. You have GE building turbines. You have another company building blades, et cetera. So similar sort of language. So that's all that the hub means, but there's actions being taken by the U.S. Department of Energy that we as a community need to be very mindful of. At our next breakfast briefing, we'll be able to talk about what did and did not happen at the New Mexico legislature related to hydrogen hub legislation. No less than 5 different bills submitted and $150 million of appropriation, but at the end of the day right now, nothing out of all of that. But the DOE is different in its request for information standing up a hydrogen hub than is the state of New Mexico, but hydrogen hub is hydrogen hub. And the key takeaway here for us and our community is jobs and pivoting of infrastructure and new opportunities for manufacturing companies like Pesco or service and manufacturing companies like Big Navajo Energy. So the DOE is putting out a request for information from anybody that wants to, community-wise or state-wise or regionally-wise, if you're interested in being in the hunt for designation as an official US DOE hydrogen hub. And here's what is the best picture I could come up with to illustrate the criteria that they're looking for. I'm sorry, this slide deck did not get distributed, but this was at the Oil and Gas Conference back in October, where Bloomberg came up with the state of New Mexico and presented on hydrogen legislation at that conference. The Senate infrastructure bill, and this is referred to as a, quote, bipartisan bill that is actually passed, okay? So this is not the Build Back Better program that's hung up. The joint bill that was already been passed, the Senate would invest, or the taxpayers invest $9.5 billion into 4 or more designated U.S. Department of Energy hydrogen hubs. Now, to qualify for a hydrogen hub, there are some stipulations that you can see on the right. 2 of the 4 hubs must be located within fossil fuel producing regions. Now, that's important because we is one of those. And as we're going to see in a minute, West Virginia is already well ahead of us in this designation. But it's also interesting to note who makes up the Senate committee that oversees all of this and who's the chair of it. Well, Senator Manchin is the chair of it, and Senator Heinrich sits on it from New Mexico. So you've got 2 U.S. senators that are familiar with hydrogen related to that. You've got a Secretary of Energy, Secretary Granholm, who came to San Juan County, I believe, in August or September, saw Bayotech and saw PESCO, heard from Senator Heinrich about potential for hydrogen. But more than just being within fossil fuel regions, you have to be able to demonstrate satisfactorily the meeting of two other criteria sets. On the supply side of what you use to get hydrogen, so think about what Eric Miller talked about in terms of breaking things apart, okay, so where's your feedstock, if you will, and then also where are you going to use the hydrogen? So you have to be able to demonstrate to the Department of Energy that you're going to be using as input energy to get hydrogen, either renewable power, nuclear power, or fossil fuels. Now, not surprisingly, the state of Arizona is aggressively working to achieve hydrogen hub designation using the world's largest commercial nuclear reactor set called Palo Verde in Phoenix. We have natural gas and we have the potential to develop renewable energy. So we've got 2 out of 3 of those. On the demand side, transportation, which is what both Dory and John were talking about, using hydrogen to power motor vehicles or trucks. I love a picture that Clifton Horst sends around of a Tesla powered auto carrier, and fully loaded, it's only able to carry 4 vehicles, whereas a hydrogen powered truck can carry 12. So think about the power there. So transportation, power generation. Next meeting on 8th, we're going to hear from a company that is looking to stand up hydrogen-powered electricity generation here in San Juan County, industry or heating. So those are the criteria. And then lastly, in answering your question about what exactly a hydrogen hub is, Arvin, I'd like to share with you the key U.S. developments and actually point these resources out to you on the internet so you're able to find them. So the bit.ly links are here. You'll see them on the published slide deck, so you don't have to worry about scrambling and writing them up. But there are 3 key pieces of things if you want to know what the federal government is doing, you need to know about. First is more detail on the Department of Energy implementing that $9.5 billion designated fund set for hydrogen infrastructure. The second is the push by the Biden-Harris administration as part of its clean energy agenda, and hydrogen is a big part of that, and their white paper on that. So it contextualizes hydrogen in the scheme of a whole bunch of other things, including other sorts of clean fuel standards that can potentially affect gasoline and other things like that. And then lastly, I mentioned that West Virginia is well out of the gate on things. What exactly does that mean? What is it looking like? Who are their partners? And one of the key things to know about a hydrogen hub is you can't do it unilaterally. You need partnerships. You need to think about environmental justice. You need to think about the criteria that were shown on the previous slide. So West Virginia is trying to do all of that. And so if I can pop out a PowerPoint here for a minute and hop over here to the various pages that I bookmarked for you. This is the press release, and look at how recent that date is, February 15th. So all of this is rapidly emerging information. And if I've learned anything myself in the Hydrogen Hub since I first heard about it in more detail back in October, and I think Arvin will testify to it and other board members aforesaid, it changes, and it changes fast. So you're going to need to keep up with this. Foresaid is very dedicated to keeping you informed through our newsletter, and would encourage you to sign up for that newsletter. But this is the detail of what they have, and there's a lot to that particular press release. The second thing I mentioned is the fact sheet. And so this fact sheet is got hydrogen in it, but more broadly speaking, it is the clean energy agenda of the Federal Executive Administration there in DC. And this is also dated February 15th. So this white paper is very new. And the words that you're going to continuously hear is decarbonization, okay? So that's really what you got to kind of think about is decarbonization. It's about the reduction of emission into the atmosphere of carbon dioxide. And that's what this policy is about. Lastly, the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, which I mentioned Senator Manchin's the chair, our own Senator Heinrich sits on, the Wyoming senator sits on it as well. Senator Manchin and a couple of representatives from West Virginia, House members, announced literally the day that the DOE came out, this is what we're doing. So that's how behind the scenes they've been working. New Mexico or San Juan County, we're a little further behind the curve, but certainly in the hunt for having similar sorts of news at some point in the future. But I think it's important for you to go and look at what West Virginia is doing to get an idea of how that might work. And if you'll come to the next breakfast, we're going to have a lot more information about whether it's county's initiative or a state initiative or regional initiative. We're going to have more clarity on that. But when you click the details can be found here on stuff, take a look at that link. I'm not going to bore you with that because my time is up. I had 10 minutes and I did it in 10 minutes. But I would encourage you to go and look at these resources. And then lastly, Arvin, in wrapping up the answer to my question, what exactly is a hydrogen hub? I would encourage each of you, as you have questions, to submit them to Four Corners Economic Development. We are an agency here to support and promote the economic strengthening and diversifying of our economy. Your questions, your concerns, your issues, I don't know what this might mean to my business sort of thing matters. But as I look around at my friends and colleagues here, I know we will, if we can get this, we're going to wind more motors, we're going to service more compressors, we're going to have more electricians doing programmable logic circuits, we're going to be training people in community colleges, and all of these things matter to San Juan College. So my last words are the same as my first. I'm excited about the potential of a hydrogen hub, even though we don't know quite what all that means in San Juan County. Arvin?
Thank you, Chris. And in closing, why should we be interested in a hydrogen hub? Why should we be looking at this? You've heard the presentations looking at the many components revolving around the development of industries concerning hydrogen. It's a new fuel. It's an alternative looking at lithium-type batteries because you get more power from it. Looking at truck haulage, looking at planes, looking at a number of these other areas where you need power and you're trying to move away from carbon-based fuels. But also, the thing about it also comes back to our legacy here in San Juan County, as well as the Four Corners region as a whole. As I indicated before, we've been blessed by natural resources and we've utilized that in the past. I've grown up with the Four Corners Power Plant. I wasn't there in 63, but in 65, I can remember going to Morgan Lake and watching those boat races and playing there at the lake, but seeing that power plant produce power, seeing individuals obtain jobs and Navajos begin to build a middle class. But it was a start. From Four Corners came San Juan Generating Station, came Mojave in Laughlin, came Choya, came Escalante, came Springer, and with that, the Black Mesa operations opened up. Four Corners had 3 mining operations here. We had Pittsburgh Midway next to Window Rock. We've got the mine up close to the Pruitt power plant now. So you can see that out of that first power plant back in 63, a whole generation of economic development drivers were established here in the Four Corners region, and that was the start. And again, we see that opportunity coming with hydrogen, looking at all the different types of aspects to that business that is there. But it falls to us to become educated on this particular area. Because as we move forward, as Chris indicated, there are going to be other communities vying for this. We, again, have opportunities not only within San Juan County, but we have tribes surrounding us. How do we effectively partner to develop those coalitions that will help propel this opportunity forward? I've seen the examples of that. I was part of the group that brought together the different stakeholders so that we could get the water rights resolved here between the Navajos and New Mexico, resulting in the construction of the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project. I was part of the team that came together that brought the Navajos with the state of New Mexico to expand US 550 and US 491 from 2-lane to 4-lane highways. I was part of the team that brought Navajo and non-Navajo entities, tribal, non-tribal entities together. That resulted in a hotel being built at Monument Valley. Those things are possible because when I first started those aspects, people were looking at me in the eye saying, "Why are you doing this? People have been working on this for decades. They've never gotten anywhere." But as a collective group, tribal and non-tribal, communities here, looking at Kirtland, Aztec, Bloomfield, Farmington, all of us coming together, working together, supporting this effort together, there is tremendous potential for us to look at the next economic boom. Coal, oil, and gas was the first. We've all benefited from that. I had the pleasure of growing up in this region during that period, seeing benefits. I remember students used to look at me, look at us as Navajos when we used to be carrying those big old bags of tribal clothing home from school. But those were benefits as a result of those types of development. And now we're looking at this, and more importantly, as we begin to develop this type of career opportunity, we give the opportunity for our kids to stay here. I'm the perfect example of that. I've worked hard like many of you. I put my 3 kids through college. They've got their degrees. I got one that lives in Baltimore, Maryland. I got another one that lives in Denver, Colorado. And I got another one that lives in Beaverton, Oregon. I mean, yeah. So again, how do we bring our kids back? How do we provide that next economic boom? So that's why hydrogen should be of interest to each and every one of us. And how we begin to utilize this basic information and move forward, because we at Four Corners Economic Development, we will be coming to you asking for your support, asking for your letters, asking for your investment. And the only way that we'll be able to prosper and benefit from this is if you're knowledgeable about what we're doing and that you're there as that advocate as we move forward. So again, that's what we see as the importance of this effort. What you've heard is the basic information. We're having phase or meeting number 2. We're going to dig a little bit more into this. As Chris said, a lot of this is still developing as we're going right now. We're still gathering information about what's happening around us. But as he also indicated, West Virginia, Wyoming, they're already moving forward with their hub activities. And so we got to get ourselves ready, and we got to start moving forward with our efforts. So with that, I want to thank the members of the panelists for providing us this basic information. And I'm now going to turn it over to you and ask, you know, we have a couple microphones. There's one over there with Jeannie. Nancy has another one. You have cards there. Please, we have folks here that are open to any questions that you might have. And we're looking forward to see what kind of feedback we get. So I'll turn the floor open. Yes, sir.
Arvin, I like what I'm hearing. It sounds exciting. The potential is wonderful. There has to be a downside. There have to be critics who believe there's a downside. So in fairness, anyone on the panel, Arvin, what are some of the main arguments against development of hydrogen?
Well, you know, it's interesting, and this will get into more of the next breakfast, but the battle that happened in Santa Fe is part of that, and it is how you generate the hydrogen. I think generally people are not against the use of hydrogen, and basically, for all practical purposes, hydrogen it's just a way to move energy around. Just like we move electrons through wires, hydrogen, we'd be able to move it so that you can use it in other places. And but the problem that we face is that there's a pretty strong contingent that they don't want to be making hydrogen with hydrocarbons, with methane. So because they're afraid that if you, by generating the hydrogen from methane, then that means you need more methane, which means you need to be drilling more natural gas wells, and there's emissions related to drilling, there's emissions related to transporting natural gas, and you're still drilling wells, which a lot of the groups don't necessarily like that. There's a big contingent of the quote keep it in the ground group that doesn't want to do that. So for our particular area, when we're trying to we're trying to use the assets that we have, which is our incredible natural gas reserves that have been proven up, by the way, in the last few years, that we have as much natural gas ready to be harvested out of the San Juan Basin is all of the natural gas that has been produced out of here since 1921. So when the first well was drilled. So that's the big thing, because a lot of the larger NGOs, non-governmental organizations, those guys really want to see hydrogen generated from wind and solar and just stick to that. And that definitely diminishes the advantage we have. Of course, we have potential for wind and solar, mostly solar here. But our biggest potential, which is huge, is using our vast natural gas reserves to potentially generate hydrogen, sequester the CO2 here, so we can do it at low emissions. But there's kind of that battle on saying that we can do that without emitting greenhouse gases, and their argument is no, you can't.
So following up on that, John, our next breakfast, we'll address that. We're going to have Mike Eisenfeld for the San Juan Citizens Alliance, who is a keep it in the ground advocate. But we're also going to have an education session from a person that will speak to other costs associated with renewable energy being used. And one thing that I would point out is that although San Juan County is bigger than the state of Connecticut, we're not unlimited in size. And a question is, how many tens of thousands of acres of solar panels do we want in San Juan County? And that's just a question, but if you're trying to graze cattle, every panel is a place that has a cost. So there are costs associated with energy. They're called externalities, and it's a big, hairy subject, Ron.
Yes, Nancy. James.
Thank you, Arvin. James Strickler, State Rep District 2. I serve on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and I heard this bill. There was a hydrogen hub bill presented by Patty Lundstrom from Gallup, and the pushback from the environmentalists was just overwhelming. They hate oil and gas, and that's the bottom line. It's interesting, in California, they have an aggressive renewable energy portfolio standard, and it's just not working. 14% of their energy comes from wind and solar. So the state of California has declared natural gas as clean energy, because without natural gas, wind and solar wouldn't work. So I just want to give you all that. That's a very positive development, and Europe is learning the same thing, that natural gas is very important to their energy mix, especially in Europe and in England. So it was very interesting committee hearings on the hydrogen hub. It's heavily subsidized. That's why it works. Same is true with wind and solar. Without heavy taxpayer subsidies, it wouldn't work. Without natural gas, it wouldn't work. So we're in this together, and we're in a great position in San Juan County, San Juan Basin, with our rich natural gas resources. Unfortunately, the environmentalists just don't like natural gas, but the state of California does. So that's a big development, and we'll see what happens. Hopefully that we can follow the West Virginia model. I don't think they did any state legislation to work on a hydrogen hub. We'll have to look into that. It doesn't look like the legislature is going to be very, very kind to natural gas generated hydrogen. So just wanted to pass that on. Thank you.
Thank you,
It's
Representative.
not a question, but I just want to give you a report.
Thank you, Representative. Are there other questions? Yes, there's one up here.
Hey, my name's Jeff Peace, and I'll just start out. I've got several comments, but to me, using natural gas to make hydrogen sounds like taking cattle, grinding them up, and make fertilizer so we can grow the plants to make veggie burgers. It's just ridiculous. It's such a waste. But I've got other comments too. We talk about the environmental benefits. When you burn hydrogen, it produces water vapor. That's the most abundant greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. It's not carbon-based, but it's a greenhouse gas. You go anywhere on the coast, the difference between the high and low temperature is very small because the water vapor traps the gas in the atmosphere. The energy you talked about, how much less there is than combusting hydrogen compared to methane, we put it in the pipelines. That tells me we're going to pay a whole lot more for a fuel that provides a whole lot less energy. I'm not interested in having that in my pipeline. The other part is when we make hydrogen, we need water. We're in a drought here. We can't afford to take water to make hydrogen, as far as I'm concerned. Whether we use the blue method or green method, we're using steam to make hydrogen from natural gas, or using electrolysis. I don't want to see our water wasted to do that. We talk about jobs. I read where the Escalante station was converted. It can provide 60 jobs permanent. 150 people lost their jobs down there when that plant shut down. That's not a very good trade-off, 150 for 60 jobs. I don't think there's any promise with oil and hydrogen. Does anybody here remember Solyndra? We wasted $500 million. Obama administration chose Solyndra, said they're going to help us. They went bankrupt. I don't like anything about hydrogen as a fuel. I don't like the government subsidizing and wasting our taxpayer money. Firmly against it.
Arvin, I'd like to add one thing on the water. One piece of the puzzle that is an evolving development with water is the fact that we do have a lot of produced water here in San Juan County. So this is water that is lifted off of the natural gas production, and all of us see the trucks driving by with the chains on the back and the big water tank. That water is outside of the San Juan River, Colorado River compact, which means that water is essentially a commodity. Obviously, it would have to be cleaned up because it has a lot of entrained salines and other things in it, but that water is water that we could potentially use for hydrogen and not get exposure to what, Jeff, I think you were alluding to about the limited amount of water that exists with drought. And I'm grateful for a little snow today in the La Platas. We could use a lot more.
How much water is it going to take to produce the hydrogen we need? Nobody's really quantified.
He asked how much water would it take to make hydrogen. Obviously, that's a function of the scale of the hydrogen manufacturing installation. So a Bayotech installation, a small modular unit would use less water than John's picture from the Lindy gas plant, which are air liquide plant. So it is a function of scale, Jeff, and who knows where or how hydrogen would actually be developed. I just want to point out that produced water is one resource that we're starting to uncover here, as opposed to potentially always putting it back in an injection well.
Can I answer that question on the water part? So the wells produce water, and that water is usually wasted, or you have to send that water to a retention pond. So we're planning on cleaning it up. To do 1,000 or 1 ton of hydrogen per day, you need about 2,500 to 2,700 gallons of water for that, and we produce anywhere from 4,500 adult water that's actually produced from well sites. And so anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 and so forth, depending on where it's at and located. So if you were to clean that water and repurpose that water and re-inject that instead of hauling that water to a retention pond, as really what we were looking at as a solution. Of course, that that part of it is a positive, but also, I understand what you're saying. Potable water is, vital in our region as well. But you look at some of these wells that produce water that comes out anyway, that we would take that water and then repurpose that and clean it up.
Can I address the issue of water as a greenhouse gas? Sure. So that is a concern, that water and methane are greenhouse gases. But the issue with water not being, why don't we limit the emission of water? Think of it this way. It's a saturated thing in the atmosphere. And so it's more of a function of temperature, how much water goes in the atmosphere. So it's evaporating from the oceans. It's in the atmosphere. When we have extra water in the atmosphere, it rains. So if we had oceans of CO2, the CO2 would just rain out when it got too much CO2. So, and even when you burn methane or hydrocarbons, you get lots of water as well. So there's really not, that really isn't the issue, I think. So.
And Arvin, if I could also follow up. So I think this is a great discussion, and Jeff, I appreciate that you for over the years of bringing out just the kind of common sense, scientific-based, rational thinking that we need to be doing when we do things like this. So yeah, methane, if we were to just use methane to run cars or to do things, that would make sense. But at that point, you're generating CO2 at the truck or the train or whatever you're doing. And if we are going to a world of decarbonization, and if you imagine that we get there, and that certainly is the momentum. A lot of people here in this county, myself included, have questioned some of the logic that we've been going through, but it doesn't matter. We're heading that direction. You can see the momentum is pretty hard to stop. So if we're going to a future of decarbonization, and so you're trying to, we could, as the coal plant here, if we are able to convert that with the Enchant project to sequester the CO2 and generate electricity. That's a way we could use coal to generate electricity with zero CO2 emissions. That's an option. But as we talked about, batteries are heavy. Planes are not going to work with batteries. They've done a little bit of experimentation, but they're short range. Anything that is weight sensitive, batteries are going to be a problem. So how else do you get enough energy in a carbon-free world into our transportation infrastructure? And certainly hydrogen is looking pretty good at that. Boeing just is doing research on cryogenic tanks to hold liquid hydrogen for aircraft. As I showed you, their ships are working. Large haul over-the-road trucks that are hydrogen powered would be able to, as Chris mentioned, to be able to handle a large volume of cargo as opposed to electric power. So that's why hydrogen makes sense. It doesn't necessarily make sense in everything, but hydrogen is going to be a key part of replacing kind of the liquid fuels, it looks like, that are carbon rich at this point, that we're going to have to be transitioned away if we go to that carbon free future. So, but it's a really good point that you bring up.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions out there? Yes, sir. Could we get a microphone over here? We're asking the microphone so that you're caught on the recording here.
John, I had a couple of questions for you. When it comes to, the carbon offset regulatory type environment, how many acres of greenery does it take to offset the typical production of one of those Bayotech modules? And also, what complications are introduced by trying to use wellhead gas on one of those modules as the feedstock?
Okay, I'll answer the first part, and I'm going to deflect it to Dory here that has more knowledge, I think, as far as acres of agriculture. But as far as using natural gas on the well site, you bring up a good point. Natural gas on the well site is probably, it runs 80, 85, maybe 90% methane. I think some of the coal bed methane wells are even higher than that. And then you have the other constituents, ethanes, propanes, butanes, and a little carbon dioxide. So all that would need to be, for the Bayotech units, would need to be separated out. Now that may be something in the future that can be developed to be more flexible, but for now, the inputs into the steam methane reformer on a Bayotech system requires pretty pure methane. So that is an issue that would have to be addressed on the well site, where you'd have to be working those out. But as far as, Dory, do you have any comments on the kind of CO2 emissions and what you would be doing from an agricultural standpoint?
Yeah, hopefully I understood your question right. Is that the footprint on a Bayotech unit's about a 40-foot container, so it doesn't take a large part of an area. We use about a 5-acre parcel as part of the CO2 capture, and also the Bayotech, and also we plan to have a home and demonstrate some of the areas, but most of it, the agricultural footprint, we would probably, at a minimum, we would be only 2 acres. So 2 acres and upwards of 5 acres, and possibly more based on the greenhouse and how much we yield each day. So far, Bayotech has a 1-ton unit that produces 1 ton per day. You have other ones like Lindy that will do upwards of 30 to 70 tons, and that, of course, that takes more space as well. But for right now, Bayotech is moving towards a 10-ton to a 30-ton unit in the next coming years. But as far as the space needed, it's usually right next to a wellhead, so you don't take that much space, I would say, based on what we have in front of us currently. So, and you're only, as John was saying, is that we take whatever amount of about 150 to 170 MCF a day to run that 1-ton unit. So hopefully I answered.
Do we
Thank you.
have any questions, easier questions?
I'd hate to beat a dead horse, but I'd like to follow back up on the water subject. I mean, we've been, reality, and I think most people in this room know, we've been talking about cleaning up produced water for a long time. My question is, what is the water spec, say, in the Bayotech unit? You know, does it have to be, what's the chloride content? Where do we need to be with that water? And really, is that realistic to look at produced water? I mean, when we really look at it.
Yeah, that's a good question. For us, for the Bayotech unit, it does need to be very pure. So we do need to get it cleaned up. Right now, PESCO is also working with New Mexico Tech on developing water filtration technology. We're also, so we're getting ready to set one of those, our first prototype unit out in the field for testing. And that unit, from the preliminary testing and of course all the laboratory testing that we've done with that technology using actual produced water from our wells up here in the San Juan Basin, we can get the water to that spec, to the Bayotech unit spec. And what this unit does is it just concentrates the contaminants into a smaller volume of water that would have to be disposed of in a normal disposal well. So we'll take all of those contaminants, put it into a concentrate, and then the bulk of the water then is clean enough to be used for other purposes. And of course, other purposes could be potentially for agriculture or just maybe groundwater recharge, or even potentially at some point drinking water. But if we can get it all the way clean enough, at least our plans are that we could get it clean enough to actually be used in the Bayotech unit as well.
And I'd like to add to that, just from a macroeconomic perspective, if you buy into the fact that the population in the West is growing and we have finite surface water, and the surface water is currently allocated, and you believe that Phoenix, Las Vegas, and LA are going to put a call on, and the Navajo Nation too, for that matter, now that they have a pipeline that Arvin alluded to, more of that surface water, there definitely becomes a shortage of water in the West. And if the nation decides that hydrogen is where it's moving, and it's willing to subsidize, the expense associated with the water purification that John was alluding to and the question asker was alluding to is going to have to be, pardon the pun, absorbed as part of the cost of coming up with an elemental feedstock component to making hydrogen. And the takeaway from all of this, and I think this is hopefully abundantly clear, is hydrogen is expensive and it has externalities just like all other forms of energy, and water is one part of that picture.
Yeah, and we've heard some numbers, and I guess one question rolling around in my head is this extra cost to clean up the water and to do some of these things, has that been factored into any of the numbers that we've talked about, price per kilowatt or anything like that?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Well, we're looking at that, produce hydrogen, you know, right now you're looking at a retail price of per kilogram in California on a retail level is about $14 to $18 per kilogram. And to green hydrogen right now costs around, to produce, about $30 a kilogram of, you know, utilized. So you're really upside down without the subsidies that California is implementing right now. If you do blue, gray hydrogen, you're going to be around a $5 range to $5 to $8 range on a wholesale level. So, and then producing it, those factors go in. So, you know, antiquating or calculating the cost of these things is very much of my daily looking at these costs, because you still need to make a profit at the end of the day when you sell this stuff. So the hydrogen, it's as a whole, it's I think these hydrogen hubs push those costs down, because the biggest cost that we are looking at is the transportation. So if we're anywhere from 150 miles out, our numbers start to go down because of the fact that we have to go full, tank out, come back empty, And so, and unless we have an electric vehicle, we can make it work. So those are things that that's why a hydrogen hub makes sense. If you consume in that same area, it's like a brewery. You make more money in that same area, and as you keep it localized. So, yeah.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Yes, Koji.
I saw the slide, is it in Germany where it's a big, massive structure that's a hydrogen hub? Is that what that is?
You know, honestly, I believe it's a European plant. I'm not exactly sure where it is.
Okay. I was reading an article that to do a hydrogen hub, it takes, the industry, these big industries know how that works. They know the rules and regs, they know the things about transportation. It's a big operation. And I'm wondering, we had some big industries that were here in the Four Corners area. Are you reaching out to them? Because it seems like, I know that you're mentioning how we need to have partnerships. Are you reaching out to them to, provide you, because a lot of information, I mean, they're the ones who built this big stuff and they know everything that goes into it. So I'm wondering, are you reaching out to them? Thank you.
So, Gojin, I'm going to encourage you to come to the next breakfast, and you're going to hear from one of those companies that are looking to spend big dollars doing exactly what you talked about, to not only make hydrogen, but to use it in electricity production. So the answer is yes. They are already exploring here, and you're aware through your service as a county commissioner about that company called Libertad, and they're one of several that are looking at this. And obviously, if we're designated as a hydrogen hub, whether it's the state of New Mexico or San Juan County or some subset, there will be additional stimulus through federal subsidy to potentially bring even more, and those are jobs and tax base for us.
My question relates to the deadline for submitting the paperwork. Is it actually for this federal funding from DOE? I mean, is this grant or whatever, are we actually submitting something? And who's doing it? And what's the deadline for that submittal, I guess, if there is one? Thanks.
Marvin, can you repeat that? Because I didn't think it got picked
Yeah.
up.
Basically, the question was, looking at the deadlines that are being published concerning submitting applications for a hydrogen hub, do we have, are we going to be able to meet those deadlines? How is that process going to be moving forward as we look at the development of a hydrogen hub and the funding that's going to be distributed from the federal government accordingly? So basically, we are in the processes of learning, just as you are, everything involved with hydrogen development. The U.S. Department of Energy, that's really spearheading this, is also learning as they're going. That we see this as a potential to really focus on decarbonization. It's one tool in the tool bucket in terms of how we would move towards decarbonization here in the U.S. So there is a deadline for March 8th for a request for information, meaning the U.S. Department of Energy is looking for feedback from industries, from communities. How should a hydrogen hub be designated? How should we be picking a hydrogen hub? All these types of areas are questions that they have, and they're wanting to get feedback from the rest of the country to see what other people are thinking. So that's due on on March 8th for that. As far as the actual hydrogen hub designations, there was a 180-day deadline put on that. I don't know if that deadline was when a notice for funding is going to be going out or when they plan on selecting, but 180 days from when the infrastructure bill was approved is May 10th of this year. So I don't know what's going to happen on May 10th yet. There's been no indications from the U.S. Department of Energy as to what will transpire. All they've told us at this point in time is that we're requesting information from communities to provide what should we be considering as we look at a hydrogen hub. You saw some of the basic areas that Chris presented in terms of criteria that they're looking at, but they're wanting to really look at this to say, okay, if we bring this out in terms of an application process, how should we proceed on this? So that's going to be looking at the March 8th timeframe. Now, how we're going to proceed through this, again, that's a question we're asking. Do we go as, the state right now wants to move forward. They want to bring regional partners in. They're looking at the national labs. They're looking at the universities. They're looking at building a coalition at a statewide level to look at a hub application process. You also have different regions within the state of New Mexico, southeast New Mexico, up here in the northwest corner where we both have natural gas available. You're looking at Cibola and McKinley counties that have a power plant that they're wanting to transform into a hydrogen burning power plant. So again, the question comes back, does this become a state level initiative? Does it become a regional process? As Dory indicated, the Navajo Nation is looking at this particular issue, as well as the Southern Utes. Are they going to look at this as a separate entity? Are they looking at partnership? Again, right now, we're trying to gather as much information as we can to figure out how we can do this. And we already have some groups that are ahead of us, with Wyoming having the governor come forward and bring in the congressional delegation, as well as West Virginia, Governor and Senator Manchin coming together and developing their work groups to begin to look at the answers to this and see how does this coalition work together in order to provide an application for this. And so again, we're working on this, and as we're doing this, we're wanting to educate you, the public, as to what we're looking at and what we're doing. Because again, you are going to be a part of this. And we've got to work together, looking at, the concerns of different aspects here. You've heard some. There are other concerns. How do we begin to mesh this together so that we develop a cohesive application process that we can move forward with? Anything else to add, guys?
I would say that it was, the community did query through 4CED folks about the state initiative prior to the beginning of the legislature. We did, as an organization, the executive board made a decision to allow the state to advance forward. Representative Strickler alluded to the challenges that he saw as a representative in the Energy and Natural Resource Committee. Certainly Patty Lundstrom, I got to hand it to her, gave it her all on behalf of her constituents in McKinley County to get a hydrogen hub bill through that included some state matching monies and appropriations. At the end of the day, to my knowledge, and James, you may have different insight than I do, but every single legislative appropriation got shot down in the final budget that got submitted that was going to potentially be a public sector match for hydrogen hub designation, and certainly the bill itself got knocked down. I would urge you to go to the Four Corners Economic Development website and read the most recent version of the hydrogen hub legislation that was advanced, so you get an idea of what the state's idea of a hydrogen hub designation would mean as the state is advancing it. We're waiting to learn more from the state of New Mexico. Secretary Kinney and the governor and our own legislative delegation is waiting to hear what the state may be doing relative to Patricio's question about who's filing for what and when, given the March 8th deadline, because that clock is ticking. So we're kind of in a vacuum here also, so that's not the first time San Juan County's been in a vacuum as it relates to carbon energy. So that's kind of the real life, up to the moment context of where we are at the moment with who's doing what and how.
Any other questions? We'll take one more question if there's a,
Got one in the back over here.
yes, there's
Nancy?
one back here. Mr. Grubb?
I just, I mean, I think going forward for the hub designation's a positive thing, but should we not be looking at alternatives for hydrogen production outside of getting this possible government money and things like that? I mean, if a lot of the things are in place, maybe it's something you look at later if you miss the hub designation, but I mean, it seems to me that hydrogen is a reality, at least at this point in time, for fuel, for aircraft and trucks possibly. I mean, it seems to be that the electric option doesn't fit those applications as far as getting away from fossil fuels. But, I mean, and there's money out there in this infrastructure plan besides the hydrogen hubs. Should we also be looking at money for maybe cleaning up the water, production water here as a separate application or other things? I mean, I hear this, but I also know that a lot of times when you put all your eggs in one basket and you get denied, I mean, maybe it comes later and all, but it would seem like to me we should think that there are other opportunities to make this happen than just this hub designation. That's all. I got more of a comment, or if you want to reply to it, you can.
Yeah, I think, you know, Bayotech, we've been working with Bayotech for 5 years. We hadn't even heard the word hydrogen hub. And no hydrogen hub or no hydrogen hub, we're building steam methane reforming portable units for Bayotech. So that's going to be going ahead. I think really the main thing is if that kind of money is available from the feds and we have an opportunity to seize on it, why would we let it go by? But you're absolutely right. We have a lot of the resources. We have the tremendous natural gas. We have the technology. We have a workforce that's familiar with working in industrial environments between the folks that have worked in refineries and power plants and in the oil field. So we have a lot of the key factors that we need in order to move forward as a kind of a hydrogen. One of the angles for economic development really should be this hydrogen, I think. But we've got a lot more things going on, and I think as far as the hydrogen itself, if it makes sense, it's going to be happening here whether we get the hub designation or not. That's my opinion.
And I would add that it's important to go back to the Four Corners Economic Development website and look at other focus industries that we're looking to attract, whether it's retirees, location-neutral workers, film, different kinds of manufacturing or value-added agriculture. San Juan County's future, in this man's opinion, is not a one-trick pony dependent only upon a hydrogen hub designation. It would be nice to have, but it's not the only thing that we have as assets in this community to work and grow on. And going back to Arvin's point, be able to have our kids stay here with good jobs and bright futures.
So again, I just want to thank everybody. I'm very cautious of time. I know many of you are very busy people, and I appreciate you taking the time to come and join us this morning. We've got another session that will be on March 8th, looking at more questions and really looking at the politics that we're seeing happening right now and providing that information to folks. But I want to thank Mr. Miller, Mr. Peters, Mr. Byram, and Mr. Hunter for taking the time to provide us some fundamental information about hydrogen, the hydrogen hub, and the industry here. So if we could give them a little applause here, appreciate that. I also want to thank Greg Allen here, who's recording this session. This will be put together and we'll have it on our website so people can see what the presentations were. You can go back and see what was presented and questions asked. But again, with the San Juan Safe Communities initiatives, I really want to thank him and his group for coming and assisting us because again, they are very in tune with what we need to be doing here in the community. And again, I want to extend my gratitude to both New Mexico Gas Company and ConocoPhillips for not only sponsoring this meeting, but the next one coming up on March 8th. I truly, truly thank you for that sponsorship, and we hope that we continue our partnership efforts. Now, in terms of some couple last things, again, please turn your name tags in. Jeannie has the baskets back there. Please turn your name tags in. I'm sure many of you will come back for our second session. We can use these name tags again. And then please fill out the evaluations and drop those off also. We appreciate that. And if you have any indications of thinking about it, we have pledge cards available on the table that you can also take with you. So again, I just want to thank you very much for all you've done and all that you've really your participation here. We've got a little bit more food left. We got some coffee, etc. I don't want to be drinking and eating all of that stuff, so please help yourself. So again, thank you very much, and we'll see you on March 8th. Thank you.